Hello and welcome to my podcast. Do me a favor, subscribe to the John Keim Report wherever you get your podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. You can find us there as part of Ampire Media, Ampire. Always much appreciated when you tune in. Don't forget you can read my work on ESPN.com. Kind of at a quiet part in the summer here right now, folks. So there's not a whole lot going on. There is an NFC East roundtable that we had that I did with my other reporters. So that should be up on ESPN.com. So look for that. Just kind of a little Q&A for each of us. We all answer some questions, but you get a sense of not only the Commanders, but also the other teams in the division, which is kind of important to know about as we get into closer and closer to training camp. So anyways, today I'm joined by Bram Weinstein, the voice of the Commanders. And what we want to talk about today is like taking a look at 5 players. I recently wrote about them for ESPN.com about 5 Commanders who are entering key contract years for different reasons. It could be the last year of their deal. It could be looking for an extension. It could be looking basically maybe to get guaranteed money. Hello, Marshawn Lattimore, for next year. So a lot of reasons, but they're entering key years and they are key players. So that's like, there's a lot of guys who are in a contract here because they have a lot of one-year deals. I mean, Zach Ertz and Bobby Wagner are too, but if they have good years and want to come back, they're going to be back. So, but with some of these other ones, there are a lot more questions with it. And so Bram and I get into each one of those 5 and to discuss like their importance and what we see for them this season, et cetera. So I don't have a whole lot to say before I get to Bram. I know there's still talk about the RFK Stadium bill and the site. And I told you last time, and you know, what you consistently hear from people is that the July 15th deadline is going to be difficult. I do know that if it creeps too far into the fall, it could impact whether or not the Commanders go to the RFK site. And I think one of the things that's most important to them is that 2030 year to get this settled. And it's also true that if they let's say this falls apart in DC, you could go to Landover, start it over again. Now if you do that, you're kind of in a tougher negotiating spot. If you do that though, you can get the shovel in the ground very soon after the agreement would be signed versus having to wait for a stadium to be torn down in the district. So because if they built it at Landover, it would be separate from where the current site is. It would be right by there. They have so much property that you could do that while the other one is still being used. Anyways, that's down the road. So I think the Commanders still feel good that something will get done, but we'll see how this unfolds. So I still think that the DC Council approves the budget. Will they do it or not the budget, but the RFK proposal? Will they do it in time? That's the big question. That's what I don't know. Could be late July, could be early August, could be in the fall. Don't know yet. Anyways, that's all I have with that. Here's my conversation with Bram Weinstein, the voice of the Commanders. All right, Bram. So recently I wrote for ESPN.com a story on 5 Commanders who are entering a key financial year for them. And it could mean whether they get an extension like a Laramie Tunsil, or maybe just another offer, a guy going into his free agency year like Brian Robinson, Deebo Samuel. So I am curious, like the list was Deebo Samuel, Laramie Tunsil, Brian Robinson, Marshawn Lattimore, and Daron Payne, and all for different reasons, right? But I'm curious, like, first of all, how would you break this down, and what is this a good thing to have these kind of key players going into this kind of a year?
So I guess I'm not surprised that they are kind of back where they were a year ago. I mean, when they reshaped the roster, they went and brought in a lot of players, and yeah, they gave a little bit of term to Dorrance Armstrong and Tyler Biadasz, Frankie Louvu, but they didn't give a lot of term or a lot of length or really anything cap prohibitive. And a year later, I guess I would put it this way. Like, I'm not really sure who you would look at that was on the roster that carried over outside of Sam Cosmi, who got a long-term deal that warranted the necessity to lock up. And so they've used the similar game plan here. And this may go on for another season as they go through draft classes, build up their core players. There feels like there's this kind of like NBA/NFL mentality all going on at the same time, which is we want to be flexible with our roster because we know we're going to improve it or try to improve it as we move along here with younger players that come into our system. At the same time, we can be extremely competitive very quickly, but we just have to be careful with how we handle it. And I think you're seeing them kind of walk that line. And obviously, it was jackpot a year ago. Let's see what it is this year. But as you wrote this piece, and I like saw these, people you're profiling, like, yes, for very different reasons, Tunsil, Lattimore, Payne, as opposed to Robinson and Debo. I think their situations are very different from one another, but none of them warrant like doing something about their contracts this year. And therefore we reach an impasse, not impasse, the wrong word. We reach a different year next year to see how they handle it.
Right. And I think, there's one way, because I remember even asking Dan Quinn about this, like, can be a good thing for them that you have key players in these spots, because like when they traded for Debo Samuel, what they felt like they weren't really having any talks about an extension, because I think they know that, hey, they should get the quote unquote best version of Samuel in this scenario, right? Like if you want another big deal, you have to go out and produce, with Lattimore, like you need to have a good year if you want to continue to get paid at a certain level. Deron Payne, he's going to count like it's 26 some million on the cap next year. Like if you play a certain way, I don't know that you ever play under that number, but maybe you get a good extension off of that, right? Or you see what happened to John Allen, where it's like, is it, yeah, we like him, but is he worth this, right? So, and with Tunsil, I think it's the same thing. Like he's got another year on that contract after this year, like, but you have a chance to lock up a bookend, have bookend tackles for a while if you get him, and you gave up a lot to get him. So, how much can that help? Like that level of motivation be a good thing for this season?
Yeah, I like the way Quinn talked about it, where he said it's like everybody's different. I feel like, sometimes the coaches get trapped into these like, mantras. When Marshawn Lattimore wasn't there for, most of, if not all of the offseason program that was voluntary, there's an easy question to ask, like, aren't you disappointed, or don't you want everybody here? And his answer was, there's no one size fits all for everybody. Everybody's different. And I think that applies here for the contract stuff. I agree with him. Some people like security, they want it. Some people are motivated by it and want to pop up in contract years. And if they have good years, try to make the most of it and capitalize on it. So I think they're open-minded to this, but the way that they're structured right now, they have to be. They have not decided to put a lot of tenure onto just about anybody here, but I would go back to name the players that are currently on the roster that they would lock up. They already did one, Cosme. We're going to see what happens with McLaurin over the next few weeks as we head into training camp. What does this relationship look like in terms of the near term? Because I don't envision anything longer than a couple of years, 2-3 years on an extension if they go in that direction with him. So, which players are they looking at that they would extend out? And I don't think they have a lot of answers there. So I do think they're walking a line where the roster is going to continue to get shifted around until they land on their core players. Jaden Daniels is one of them. It looks like Mike Sanderstill is going to be one of them. I think they're very hopeful Josh Connerly is going to be one of them. Trey Amos is going to be one of them. Frankie Louvu clearly is one of them. So let's see what happens, beyond this season. But then you start to look around the rest of the roster and you go, okay, who are the guys that they're going to that you foresee them committing to in that way? And the list is still pretty short. So they're kind of working this roster over.
Right. And let's take a look at each of these guys, like Debo Samuel, again, last year of his deal, and depending on how what happens this year, we'll see what his market value will be next year. He'd be in his third, he'd be considered quote unquote an older player with some mileage on him. But, what are your expectations for him? And what would you say? What do you think? What would it take for you to say, yeah, you got to bring him back, whatever? And what price? The price is hard to gauge right now because that's a different conversation. But what are your thoughts on him and going into this year?
So he hasn't played in the uniform yet. I was very excited about acquiring him. I know what kind of player he is. He might as well be a running back in a wide receiver's body.
Mhm.
and or he's really more of a wide receiver and a running back's body more than anything. And if
Yeah,
you
I think that's
go
more
through
accurate.
it's really more of that. I think like that was some of the when that video came out. Like we've had two weird video things this year. One where everybody thought Jaden Daniels turned into Arnold Schwarzenegger, and another where everyone decided that Deebo Samuel suddenly was the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. And in neither case is either one of them true. If you actually walked out there and
Right,
watched
right,
them, and you saw Jaden looked like he lifted some weights, but he didn't become a bodybuilder.
right,
And Deebo Samuel is not fat. Like, like if you just go out and use your eyes, you would see
right,
all of
right,
this.
right, right.
With Deebo, listen, I mean, like, I think he is a dynamic and a very unique playmaker. He is devastating when he catches the ball and gets to the second level because he can run like a running back. He's very difficult to tackle and he's fast. I got to see, all I've seen of him up close and personal are the, few on-field things that we've been allowed to watch, which is nothing 11 on 11 and all that stuff and in shorts and all those things. But I do see where his difference making is. You can see how quickly he can get out of cuts, how powerful he is. And you can see when he catches the ball why he's so difficult down the field once he's in space to get down and why he makes so many big plays and why the yards after the catch are so high. This team needed explosive playmakers to join with Terry McLaurin. They just needed it. The more divorced you get from the season last year, the more you realize they really maximized the talent level that they had. They had to improve. And he represents an improvement. That said, like the numbers were off a year ago on him. He has been around the block for a while. So we need to see a rejuvenated player that can have an impact like he has. So I'm not even thinking about 2026 with him until we see what 2025 is. Like it's a new place. It's a new team. I know Peters knows him. He hasn't performed here yet. The numbers dipped, over the last couple of years. Let's see if they go back to the Pro Bowl level player that he was. And then they're going to have an interesting conversation with him moving forward. But, he seemed like they altered his contract so he gets the vast majority of it guaranteed. So it is a one-off show me deal for both sides, honestly. And I'm comfortable with that going into the season.
Yeah, and like I said, I think they like this because they feel like, again, Peters knows Samuel pretty well, and they feel like because of that scenario for him, that they're going to get the best out of him, whatever that means at this point, right? And I think he's a very good complementary chess piece to what they have in McLaurin. Like he's not a guy that if Terry ends up somehow, excuse me, holding out, which who knows what will happen. But he's not a guy like, okay, well, you got another 1A over here. I don't view Debo that way, but I do view him as a valuable chess piece because of what he offers and his yards after the catch. I think is highly valuable in an offense that where if you're going to throw underneath, can you turn a 10-yard gain into a 60-yard gain? Well, he's got that ability because that's what he's shown in his
Yeah.
career. So, the other guy then, or let's go to B-Rob first, because I don't know what is he capable of at this point? We've seen a lot of him over the last few years. What is he really capable of? And is he capable of making it a tough decision for them to maybe bring him back next year? Can he get to that level?
So with Robinson, he's a big curiosity of last
Right,
year. I mean, everything was going so well that like his performance dipping at the end of the year or the last third of the year still is kind of an unexplained mystery to me. I think there were some injury things to take into account. Obviously, there was attrition on the offensive line. The run game in general really
right,
dipped. Reasons for that. So I don't want to blame all of it on him. Cliff Kingsbury said it. Dan Quinn said it this spring. Like he knows it's a big year for him. It's a contract year for him. He's in the unenviable position of running backs just don't get paid a lot of money unless you are Saquon Barkley or Derrick Henry or Christian McCaffrey. Or eventually Jahmyr Gibbs. Like if you are maybe Bijan Robinson, like if you are a high tier huge stat filler, multi-dimensional, unstoppable force type of player, then you get paid like this. Otherwise, you get lumped into what is the middle class, and it's not a high tier paying position. So for Robinson, I think knowing that, and I think what you're alluding to, and I agree with, I think he's a very good player. He's not a home run hitter, right? He's not a game-changing type of running back, but he typically is a very reliable, tough, physical presence for them. I think he's a very good running back. I think considering what their running back room looks like, he's going to be counted on a lot again this year. Their season is going to be dependent on how he performs throughout it. And then we're going to see where we are on the other side of it. This was a position going into the draft. I honestly thought like they could have used their first or second round pick on a running back because of the strength of the position coming into the draft. I wouldn't have been surprised if Travion Henderson was a Commander right now. Like I wouldn't have been surprised if that ended up happening, because it goes back to the other thing we were talking about, which was this team needed to get more explosive playmakers. I like Brian, but he's not the explosive playmaker. If he was paired with their Jahmyr Gibbs, then I think you look at it like the Montgomery Gibbs tandem and you go, that's a really, really, really good tandem. And I think that that's what he could be here. But as the primary, singular number one running back, you're not going to get a ton of explosive plays out of him. So what does his future look like? I don't know. I do know that this is a really, really, really big year for him to make a case to be part of whatever the backfield looks like moving forward.
Right. And, the other factor is Krosky Merritt and how he performs, because if he shows that he can be an effective replacement, you're not going to pay Brian Robinson. You can go get another guy in the draft next year. Clearly, they wanted somebody else. Like I had heard before the draft, they wouldn't take one in the first or probably second round, but you knew that they wanted one because it was a deep class, that they would get somebody and view that person as either complimentary, like if you get Travion Henderson, that's a full-time dude, right? With Krosky Merritt, I think we got to wait and see what he does. But could he be a guy that fits what they want and at a much lower cost, allowing you to then spend elsewhere? And I think it'd be hard I think Robinson has to make a strong case. And I do think the line impacted the run game last year, but he's also got to show that he can also help the offensive line as well. When the hole isn't there, what can you get out of it? So this is a big year for him. Marshawn Lattimore, another one. Like he's under contract next year, but there's no guaranteed money. So is this a year where he can earn, maybe have that guaranteed, or do you let him go and you save some money?
He is not unlike Debo. Like there's going to be a show me aspect of this. I'm not as hard on him as others have been, for the way he performed a year ago. Like he showed up here hurt. They traded for a hurt player. They knew this going in. They knew he wasn't going to play immediately. And there was no certainty that he was going to get anywhere near 100% throughout the rest of the season. And he tried to play through some of it and it didn't go particularly well. And there was a game with a bunch of penalties and AJ Brown took advantage of him. And I'm hoping, and again, like I wish we would have seen more of him in the spring because I would have a better feel about kind of where he is. I think Joe Witt kind of intimated that when he was like, we'll see what condition he's in when he shows up here. First impressions and first glance, he looked, like he was running smoothly to me in the little bit that we got to see of him. Can he become something closer to the player that he was a couple of years ago? If he's over all of these soft tissue injuries, and then I think we can judge him. So at this point, he's like Debo to me. Like I need to see him on the field. I need to see how he plays. I know what he was. Can he be that again? Can he reliably stay on the field? That's a big question really about him. And his future is literally tied to him being able to play and be their number one corner, to whatever degree that is. And we'll have to just see if he can do that. But I'm very cautious to say anything about beyond this season for him either, because they have the leverage point with him. Yeah. There's no guaranteed money. They have him under contract for next year. It will give them options, with him dependent on his play. If he plays really, really well, then they're going to have to make a choice if he, makes any noise about his contract. And if he's in and out of the lineup because he can't stay healthy, well, I think we all know where this will be going. Right. So this is another one like Debo that I think it's going to be a show me year for Marshawn Lattimore.
Right. And a lot of it will be showing the ability to stay healthy because it's 26 games played in the last 3 years combined. Not very good. So he's got to stay healthy. And then we'll see how much of his up and down performance last year, which was related to the hamstring and coming off and missing a lot of time and not being as sharp. and maybe not having the same burst that you want versus, hey, this is where you're at in your career. So that's something that we can all guess, but it's hard to answer that until we see him with the full off season and until we see him. Okay, now he is healthy. He said he felt really very different this spring because he feels healthy. So let's see what it looks like in the summer and then during the season if he can stay healthy. And if he can, it gives them a really strong corner combination. And if he can't, then you're going to look for another guy next offseason. So there's that. Laramie Tunsil, that's the one to me is interesting because he's got, again, another year on his deal, highly, highly affordable. They really like Connolly. Connolly, let's say that you can't work something out with Tunsil, they can move Connolly left tackle because they like him at that spot. Or you have your bookend tackles. You don't have to worry about those spots for 4 or 5 years, possibly. So, I'd be curious to see, well, what do you think about that one?
Tunsil, I think, is like Debo, they acquired him for this year and hopefully beyond. Marshawn Lattimore, they acquired for hopefully he'd be able to help them last year because of the position they were in, but I know that they were not counting on it. And then, but it was for the future, for the next couple of years to see how it works out. Tunsil feels differently to me, John. Like, I don't think you give up the assets you give up for him to see if it's a 1-year run and then move the guy you just drafted into his position. Like, I think the object is to have him here for a 3 to 5 year window, I think. Now, I believe that, he's going to have to continue his level of play, but I haven't seen a drop off. I mean, I know he had a lot of procedural penalties last year. I would hope that corrects itself, I hope that that's something that doesn't carry over, but it's not like his play has dropped off that dramatically at all. And anyone who follows it says like he's still a top tier tackle. And so I believe, and then, he is walking into after this year, he also, like Lattimore, has 1 more year left on his contract. I think if he performs as an all-pro left tackle again, he's going to ask for something. And I think the team will probably meet him there. So I think he's different than the others. I think they acquired him to be their left tackle through at least Jaden's first contract. I think that's the object here. We'll see if it works out, but I have seen no evidence in his play that would suggest he isn't going to do that. So I think he's different than the others. I believe he's supposedly there. I don't know what long-term means anymore in the NFL, but 3 to 5 years that he's their left tackle. I think that's the plan with him personally.
Yeah, I'm with you. I always thought, and I even in the story, I even put this one is not really the same as the others. It's just that his contract he'd be up for an extension next year. Then it's going to be a matter of, do you get that worked out or not? Because again, you have a chance they have tried to, over the last 2 years, especially, have revamped that offensive line. He's a key part of that, and they're very high on him. And again, you could have he and Connolly together. And even if you see Connolly as a future left tackle, that might be 4 or 5 years down the road when he's still in his prime. And that's when Tunsil maybe is ready to retire or something like that. So then you have your guy, or if nothing else, you have your quote unquote Lane Johnson at right tackle, for this team, for your most prized possession, which is Jaden Daniels. So I agree. I put him in a different category for sure because of all those reasons. And it's really more about what would the cost be to keep him here versus, oh, is this a 1-year thing? I don't view it that way either at all. So Daron Payne's the other one. Now this one, because he's got over a $26 million cap hit next year, that's awfully high for a defensive tackle unless you are making big time plays consistently. What do you think?
So Daron is in the same situation that John was in a year ago. He's going to have to, I think either way they would restructure his contract. I don't think that there's a moving forward likely with his contract next year as it stands. This year is going to be about, is he part of the future or not? I think not unlike with John. John's ended up being incomplete because he missed so much time with that injury a year ago. And so with Daron, listen, I think they purposefully messaged what kind of offseason he had. They went out of their way to bring up his name unsolicited, okay, to say he's having this great offseason. We've talked off air a little bit about this. I do think that like there is an interesting dynamic of forever it was John and Duran, capital J, John and Duran. And now that John's not here, how does that kind of open up the room for and a vacuum for Duran to kind of step up a little bit as being one of the leaders potentially? He's very soft spoken. He's not somebody who is like out there doing the interviews and all that type of stuff. But it does appear as if, at least if you listen to the coaches and see what kind of shape he's in now, that he's taking the bull by the horns. To me, there's no bigger motivator in the professional sports than a contract year, which he is in. And so while he does have one more year left on his contract, the reality is it's either going to be restructured to stay here, or there's going to be the same fate that happened with John, and he's not going to be here. So this is an enormous year. And I am interested to see what is life like for him without it being John, capital J, and Duran. Instead, it's Duran and the other players on the defensive line room. And I want to see how he handles that. And, you know, if you listen to the coaches, it sounds like I don't want to dismiss John, but it does feel like there's been a welcome change here for him. And then add in, this is a big year for him in his career for whatever his next deal is going to be, whether it's here or somewhere else. And he seems like to have been motivated by all of that.
No, for sure. And by the way, his cap number next year would be 28 million. So he's not going to play under that. It's like you said, it's really about, do
No.
you tear something up and get an extension or extend it and lower that cap hit? But you can't have him play under that, because the production doesn't match that number, right? And so I think the whole thing with John too is the stepping out of his shadow, and that can be. Now, is that going to help on the field? I don't know, because it's helpful to have a good player next to you. So some of that will rely on Johnny Newton, or be Javon Kinlaw, et cetera. But I do think maybe in terms of how he feels in that building, people I've talked to just say he's more gregarious, right, than he was. Now, I think that could be too in that room is John was a strong alpha male, had a strong voice. And now that that's not there, you need someone else to be that guy in there. And I think he's one of those guys that they look up to. I think there are good pros in that room, Dorrance Armstrong, Dietrich Wise, et cetera. But Daron Payne's a guy that I think people look up to because he's been, they feel he's been consistent, right? So I think that's where it probably helps, is being in that room. Do you have a louder voice than maybe you had in the past? And how that translates in the field, I don't know, because we got to
Yeah.
see it. Like you're right. Like they pointed him out for a reason multiple times. I mean, there was one day where it may as well have been Daron Payne key to Ashburn day, right? Because that's all you heard is like that day
Yeah.
is like, oh, Duran's had, he's one of two guys, his focus and all that. Well, we'll see how it does it translate into more impact plays, which is what they need from him, and then more consistent impact plays, I guess. So that will be the key, and certainly capable, and maybe with a deeper group around him that will help. So, but yeah, I think for that line to have a good year, he's got to really have a strong year too, and I think they know that as well. So
I mean, a
that's
couple of years ago when he had the contract extension, he had 11 and a half sacks when he was in a contract year, which was a big number for a defensive
right.
tackle. And we've all offseason, what have we talked about? Like, where's the pass rush going to come from? Where are they going to get those numbers from? Who's going to be the disruptive player? Duran can be that. We've seen how good he can be, and hopefully we get a replicated version of it, and it's going to help him no matter whether he's here or somewhere else next year. If he pulls off another season like that from a couple of years ago, if he replicates the contract year play, it's going to help him no matter where he is on the other side of this.
And the whole thing is that 11 and a half sacks is an outlier for him. He doesn't have to get to that number to be a disruptive player. If you can get to that 7 sack in that range, just be more than what you have been. And that can also be against the run as well, not just the pass. And it's also collapsing the pocket. It's doing all those things. As we've seen over the years, sometimes those sacks can be a little bit empty if you're not getting pressure otherwise. So if you can get consistent pressure,
Yeah.
then that's really what they need. Be an impact in that way, and get more than 4.5 sacks, is which he's kind of typically been in that range. So get to that 7-8 sack range, and then you can see, because I do think yeah, I think that's where he needs to be, because that's when you say, okay, now you can extend them and do that. And I do think I do get the sense that they would like to find a way to keep him around. But again, it all depends on what he does this year. So, anyway, those are the five guys.
Yep.
Big money here for them, and I do think that stuff can help. I felt like there was some guy, when you're in that last year, but like as you pointed out, what Quinn said is that with each guy it's different, and they're motivated by different things. But for some of them, it's going to be interesting. I think like a guy like Lattimore, it's just stay healthy. I don't think it's about motivation to be good or not. I think it's just, can you stay healthy, right? So there you go. Anyway, Bram, thanks a
Yep.
lot and appreciate it. That's it for this episode. Thanks to Bram for joining me, and thank you, as always, for tuning in. I will be back on Thursday with another episode, another one with Bram, where this time we talk about expectations for the Commanders after coming off such a good year. So join us then. I'll talk to you next time.